The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.
Welcome back to Tony Kurre Radio, the TKR Radio Network, and of course also available Tony Kurre Radio Podcast. We're available on every podcast. This is the Keefer and Kurre Show. You can hear the show at least 5 days a week on the TKR app. Make sure you download it through Apple or on Android at Tony Kurre Radio, and go to your favorite podcast area and you can search any of our indices. We're available on all those. So I'm sitting there talking to Kip, and we do, of course, Kip does a Need to Know every single week. We do the Keefer and Kurre Show. And we go back and forth with our topics, and I had spoken to Kip earlier about talking about the NBA and what makes a great player and what constitutes failure in sports. And then I started coming up with all these gambling questions because I like to, for entertainment purposes only, like to make a little. And I said, your son is quite the man too. Case Keefer, of course, he's a sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun. He has been absolutely prolific in his future bets. He's in the ground zero at Las Vegas, and he's joining the show this week. Case, what's going on, brother? How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm always down to start the day with a little sports betting talk. So thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
And I know you've done a lot of work with your dad. I think it's just incredible. I used to work with my father. Of course, it was rolling newspapers. It was a little different than doing some sports talk like you do with your old man. But talk about what it's like to work with your dad, Kip. And of course, you did a show that was televised here locally last year. But talk about what it's like to be on with your dad.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been great. I mean, I can't deny, I think a lot of what I'm doing right now, his fingerprints are all over for sure, especially with the betting stuff and the sports stuff. I think for better or for worse, it kind of traces back to him. So, yeah, it's been cool. And I believe we ran the show on your network last year. So thanks for that. Had a nice betting season, and always good to talk about it and get the conversations across to as many people as possible.
And Kip, I'm not even going to ask you because you talk about your sons every stinking show, man. I know how much you love your boys and how much you love to work with them. So you're good to go, my man. But welcome to the show, Kip. Go ahead.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to hear that, Tony, and I'm excited for this edition. But I'm also excited to just have a good, comfortable seat here and let you, in case, go ahead and answer all of your questions, and I'll chime in whenever it's appropriate.
Okay, there you go. Hey, Case, first of all, I'll start with you. Being a sports editor at a newspaper in Las Vegas, I can't even imagine how many birds you must have chirping in your ears, because obviously you have a huge following with the Las Vegas Sun. You're at the Mecca. You're the ground zero of gambling, not only in the United States, but the world. But what do you have a lot of people grabbing onto you? And do you consider yourself a handicapper at large? I mean, you obviously write for a newspaper, but it seems like anyone who's got a thought or an opinion on a game could be considered a handicapper in Las Vegas.
Yeah, well, it's been crazy. I mean, it's the job as far as at the Sun and Greenspun Media has changed a lot. I've been here since 2009 now. I moved out here the day after I graduated college, actually. And, you don't have to live here to know how much the sports landscape has changed. I mean, now with professional sports basically taking over between the Golden Knights, now in the Stanley Cup and the Raiders, there's construction everywhere getting ready for the upcoming F1 race, which is going to supposedly be the most expensive sporting event in American history. So there's just so much more going on than when I first moved here. But the one constant kind of has been, like you said, the betting, and it's a thing that I latched onto pretty early on. I mean, in large part covering, I wrote a lot about it, but of course, betting myself too. I'd say I was doing it at a pretty low level to begin with, but you are immersed in it for so long and around it for so long that I feel like I've worked my way up to a point where it is a huge part of my life, just as big as my role at Greenspun and as the sports editor for the Sun and the Weekly and our publications. I mean, I'm betting every day. I basically bet every sport, and have had a lot of success, especially the last few years. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's a little bit of my bio. It really is those two prongs. I would definitely call myself a handicapper, a sports bettor, semi-professional, in addition to sticking with the journalism for going on 15 years now.
You can see all the Case's stuff at LasVegasSun.com. Of course, a great site, and all of his blogs and his recent articles are up. I was looking at some of the things. You did have some good racing tips this past weekend because it was a great racing weekend here in the United States. He's Keefer. He joins us right now, sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, of course. Kip Keefer. And Kip, I wanted to ask you, obviously, you've been well entrenched, perhaps more so just in horse racing, and certainly you gave me a couple of winners in the Kentucky Derby, Preakness, Belmont coming up here as well. But what have you learned, and obviously you've been doing a little longer than your son, but what have you learned from your boy about how gambling works and some of the intricacies and the ins and outs of the gambling world?
Well, Tony, I had an absolute joyride last year in working with Case on our show, Wanna Bet, which he mentioned not only appeared locally here, but also on your platform on Tony Kurre Radio Network and all of the Apple platforms as well. And I think it got a lot of attention. But for me, it was absolutely illuminating because I grew up watching my dad, who was, to be frank, not very good, but he loved to play the games, and he played it like a typical fan. He would kind of bet with his heart and not his head, and kind of fall into the traps where he didn't really care what the line was. He was a Washington Redskins fan from the time he was born, and pretty much bet the Redskins every week, no matter what the line was or what the circumstances were. And that was a lot of his pattern. And Monday Night Football was always a very stressful occasion in my childhood because he was always trying to, I got to double up the catch up. And man, every play was like critical. You're biting your nails. So to see the way cases evolved, to take it from what I witnessed in my younger years. And it's one of the reasons I really don't play sports ever from a betting standpoint. I think because I was kind of scarred by my youth. But to see Case embrace it to the point that he has, and it's amazing. And the biggest thing I learned on Wanna Bet with him last year is his approach is completely different than what you would think of a conventional sports bettor. He is an investor, Tony. He has a portfolio, and he even calls it that. And all of his bets are with great logic and also interwoven where he can, buy in extra if the appropriate, or he can hedge what he already has. I mean, he approaches it just like people on Wall Street approach their daily investment tasks. And I found that remarkable and learned a lot in that process last year of just getting a chance to sit down, because in our general conversations, we really don't get into the mechanics of what he does. But doing that show was just fantastic for me, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
All right, so I got a ton of questions. We could probably go an hour and a half. We only have about 30 or 35 minutes. We may go a little long. Case Keefer joins us here, sports editor of the Las Vegas Sun, of course. Kip Keefer is the Keefer and Kurre show, runs on Tony Kurre Radio and also on our podcast network. But I've got to ask you guys, we're recording the show on May 30th. I've got to ask you, what the hell did we just see in that Eastern Conference Finals between Boston and Miami? Miami goes down on the mat after a game 6, which is one of the most unbelievable finishes we've ever seen in any sport, period. And everyone's like, can Miami get up off the mat? I loved what Spoelstra said. We want to play right now. I heard, of course, Jimmy Playoffs come out and say, we will win the game 6 and game 7. And they did. And they win by 19 on the road. I don't know what I've just seen. And then you throw in the gambling line where it opened at 9. You're talking about would have been the first team in a 151 playoff series where you've gone to have a 4 or 3-0 deficit erased and win 4. And of course, what happened? Now they're 0-151. But I'll start with you, Kip. What exactly did we just see here? And man, how good does it have to be from the Miami area? You got the Florida Panthers who are an 8 seed and the Miami Heat is an 8 seed, both going to their championships.
Absolutely unprecedented. We've never seen anything like the two lowest seeds in their respective conference now getting ready to line up in their finals of their sport. So that's a remarkable historic thing that we're witnessing. But I think overall, and I'm interested to hear Case's response to this. I think this was a case where Eric Spoelstra, who I think is maybe the least appreciated coach in all of major sports, Tony, he has never won a Coach of the Year title. Amazing. Eric Spoelstra has crafted a competitive, high-level team every year that he's been the coach. A lot of people say, well, he had LeBron and the dream team on that sequence of championships. And I don't think he got any credit. But the job he does year in and year out, and to have Miami in the finals is absolutely incredible. And the other two things I'll say real quick is I think the coaching disparity is wide because, I just had to glance at the resume of Boston's 34-year-old coach last night. I don't like the butt in of coach's time on the telecast, but he was just downright rude to the little sideline reporter last night. He was given 2-word answers. It was just, I just think this guy is not really ready for prime time. The only head coaching job he had prior to this was the head coach at Fairmont State in West Virginia. And that was only for a year or two. He's been an assistant on the staff, and I guess Brad Stevens thinks he's the golden boy, but I'm not impressed at all. And I think Eric Spoelstra completely outcoached him and had his team much more prepared, because I think the Heat force you to play their game, which is more of a grinded out possession by possession style. And it's worked well now as they've sent Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Boston home. Just a remarkable job by Eric Spoelstra and the supporting cast players. How big did they step up? Caleb Martin became a superstar overnight in this series. I mean, just phenomenal.
Case, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, Spoelstra, I do feel like he's getting a little bit of his credit now, but I feel like I've banged the drum for the guy for a long time. He is a phenomenal coach, and it is a mismatch against Joe Mazzulla, who I guess I do have a little bit more empathy for than Kip, though. I mean, I don't think I think it did show he wasn't ready for the moment, that he's not on Spoelstra's level. But this is a pretty tough situation that he got thrown into. I don't think the Celtics had any eyes on him being the coach this year. You look at the Ime Udoka situation, and then I think what a lot of people don't realize is he wasn't even the second or third assistant last year. They lost Will Hardy to the Jazz. They lost some other assistants. He was really kind of the last man standing, got thrust into the job. And if you go back to early in the season, I mean, the Celtics looked like the best team in the NBA. They had the highest point differential. They were breaking offensive records. He had a little bit to do with that, but it was just a tough situation for him, and going up against Spoelstra, I think that is a huge factor. The other big factor, and I know it's basic and people probably don't like to cite it, but I think it just comes so much down to 3-point shooting. I mean, the Heat, I think shot 50% or better from the 3-point line in 3 of 7 games this series. During the regular season, I heard a stat they shot 50% or better in 3 out of 82 games in the regular season. I mean, they were just lights out from 3. Now, a lot of that is getting open shots and the scheme and rising to the occasion, but the Celtics were kind of the flip side. They were terrible from 3 overall in the series, including in that decisive Game 7. It's a cliche, but the NBA is really a make or miss league, especially from long range with the way the game plays these days. And I think the Heat were kind of on the right side of those of hitting those 3-point shots, but it's an amazing run. We have the number 1 in the Western Conference in both the NHL and NBA finals against the number 8 in the Eastern Conference. And how funny that it's both the Heat and the Panthers. I'm excited to see how both these series end up playing out.
It's absolutely amazing what's going on in sports right now. It really is. Tony Kurre here, along with Kip Keefer, of course, the Keefer and Kurre Show, and Case Keefer, his boy, the sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, and a prolific futures bettor, and just does a fantastic job for the Las Vegas Sun. He joins us here for the Keefer and Kurre Show. So I did a little research, and I found that home field advantage, obviously, or home court advantage in the NBA is by far the biggest in the 4 major sports. Roughly 61% of the time, home team wins in the NBA. And you see, really lousy teams who are at home that are usually about a 3 or 4 point dog against one of the better teams in the NBA, and they end up winning those games. And then in the playoffs, it actually goes up to about 64.5% of the time. This is over the last 20 years. And then I see that line last night, Case, where it opens at 9. It goes down to 7.5. Game 6 was kind of surprising because you had Miami at home, actually an underdog after they, of course, had won the first 3 games of that series, and everyone was like, I don't care. And maybe that was the better that was thinking that they were going to push it to a Game 7. Or maybe that was a heart thing where people wanted to see a Game 7 between these two teams because I think they were so evenly matched, certainly in a defensive prowess. But I was talking to Kip. I said, I don't get this line in Game 6. I didn't understand it. And obviously, Boston covered the line. But I've got to ask you this question. I think I know the answer, but I got to ask you, does Las Vegas ever set lines to screw with bettors' minds? Because I think we can overthink it, and we call it, here in town we call it the smelly fish. When you see a line, you're like, wait a minute, this just does not look right. There is something wrong with this line, and it doesn't happen maybe once or twice a weekend, whether it's college football, NBA, or Major League Baseball. You're like, what the hell's wrong with this line? But it seems like Las Vegas always knows. What does Las Vegas know is your average bettor doesn't?
I'd say no, not really. The lines don't, and that's not to poke fun or say anything that you're going on a limb. I mean, I hear people say that all the time, but I don't think lines are really set to quote unquote trap people or be fishy. And in general, I think quote unquote Las Vegas gets way too much credit for how the line ends up playing out, how these games end up playing out. I mean, the bottom line is when these sports books post numbers, that they're posting it to begin with no money on it. It's a price discovery. The biggest books are putting it out there trying to get to the right price. This is something we talked a lot about on Want to Bet during the football season. But really, when you see a number move in ways that you don't really understand, you see a big move, it's not the sports books. It's the bettors. It's the guys doing this at the highest level, putting down big money and forcing the bookmakers to move the line, moving the whole global market. I mean, now you see there's probably 3 or 4 sports books in the world that are taking really big bets, and the rest of the market is just reacting to what they're doing, trying to get the right number. I think really when you see these surprising lines and you can't understand what's going on, and there were a lot of them in the NBA playoffs. I mean, the betting market was so high on the Celtics all year, myself included. Unfortunately, I thought the Celtics were the best team when they play their best, but it's really just reacting to the money that's pumping into the market. I mean, especially an NBA playoff game, there's millions of dollars bet globally. So it's not so much Las Vegas that's making these decisions. It's guys with access to really good numbers that are doing this at a really high level, that are shaping the market and ultimately making the numbers that we all react to and try to explain, even though sometimes I understand it to some people that the numbers don't make a whole lot of sense.
This is the Keefer and Kurre Show. We have special guest Case Keefer, the sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, joins us here on Keefer and Kurre. You can hear this show at least 5 days a week on the TKR app and wherever you get your podcast. I did send out a promo about a week ago when we started talking about having you on the show, and got a couple of emails, info@TonyCurryRadio.net, and this from John in Birmingham. He just wants to know, how does Vegas set lines on any game? How is that? I think there used to be a process where you used to actually have guys in a room. Is it done through a computer? What kind of algorithms are used?
Yeah, it's mostly models and algorithmic based now. I will say, I mean, it depends on the sport. There's different kind of originators in every sport, but a lot of times when we say Las Vegas, it's just kind of inaccurate. There are a couple of sports books here that do take really big bets. Circa Sports, I'd say number one at this point, and they are the first to post some lines, like college football for sure. They'll open and set the global market, but a lot of times in a lot of these sports, the first sports books that post are the offshore sports books that are taking the biggest limits to begin with, and that really is very numbers based, very statistic based, model based. It spits out a number, they post it, they get popped for whatever the limit will be on that given sport. Usually when first opening, 5 dimes or 10 dimes, which in gambling parlance, $5,000 or $10,000, and they have profiled all their players. So if it's a really sharp guy that makes his living doing this, that bets $10,000 3 straight times on a game, you realize that number's wrong, and you keep moving it until it gets to that number. So again, model first of all, but really a big thing about the betting market is just reacting to what for a lack of a better term, these market influencers are doing. That's what ultimately is going to set the line that you're probably betting into, unless you're betting right away.
I will say it's really interesting because everyone always goes, man, Vegas has got it. And if you've got a game that's favored by 17, they win by 17, it looks brilliant. But for as many times as that happened, there are teams that are favored by 3 that win by 30. And so it's like sometimes Vegas is off a little bit and sometimes it gets away. Kip, you want to fire a question at your son? Go for it.
Well, I just want to emphasize that by saying, remember, Georgia was the 13.5-point favorite over TCU.
True. And
they eked out a 58-point win. So it's not always a perfect people thought that was going to be a competitive game. Wrong. I do want Case maybe to emphasize, Tony, because along these same lines, one of the other continually recurring themes on Want to Bet last year was Case emphasizing to folks that they need to be ready early in the week and right when lines, and we're talking about football predominantly because, of course, football is a weekly enterprise where these other sports you don't have as much time. But I guess, Case, kind of embellish a little bit on all sports, the importance of really kind of analyzing the lines right when they're released, because that's where you find disparities. And I know you've really taken advantage of that over the years.
Yeah, I know it sounds basic, and it's probably similar to a lot of advice you'll hear elsewhere, but I really think that's been the biggest thing in my gambling career, or just small things that some people might roll their eyes at or take advantage of. Having multiple sports books to bet at, so you can compare a bunch of numbers. And for me personally, it is betting as early as possible. I mean, on an NFL Sunday, I'm usually covering a game, so I can't be there at open. But by Sunday night, I've usually bet most of what I'm going to bet on the upcoming NFL week. In college football, it's the same way. It's gone earlier and earlier as the years have gone on. Now I'm doing almost all my betting Monday. Just bottom line, if you feel like you have an edge, if you feel like you know the numbers well, you need to be ready to pounce on this, because it kind of goes back to all of what I have been saying about people that are pouring a lot of money into this. When you're getting into the market earlier, you're not competing against as many people. Those numbers aren't really set in stone yet, so you can pick off some good prices before. You want to beat these guys that are betting tens of thousands of dollars, that really have access to great data to really understand how betting works at a higher level and do well. The earlier you bet, the least likely you are to be going up against them, the more likely you are to be able to find better numbers. I mean, it's different for everyone how you approach this, but I'd say, most people are probably more recreational on the lower level. And I'd say the biggest difference you could make is by having multiple sports books, by betting early and tracking, not only if your bets win or lose, because we all, it's why we love sports. There's craziness that happens in sports all the time, but what you really need to track is the number you bet and where it closes. So let's say it's that Georgia TCU game you talked about. I think it might have closed as high as like 14 and a half, 15. I do think it got over the 14. But when it opened, I mean, you could find as low as I think maybe even 10 and a half, at least 12.
Wow.
So say I bet Georgia minus 10 and a half, and I did bet something like that. I had a huge bet on Georgia to win the national championship, but not to pat myself on the back, but I was confident they were going to blow them out too. I actually doubled down, so to speak, and bet more on the spread. So let's say you bet, Georgia minus 10 and a half. You want to go back and look at the closing line. If it closed 15, there's a lot of calculators. You can figure out your exact closing line value. And if you're consistently beating the number and getting big plus value on that, that's a good sign. And then the flip side, maybe you don't want to bet as early. If you see that number and you bet, I'm going to jump on TCU plus 10 and a half and it ends 15. I mean, that's going to decrease your win percentage over time by, 15, 16%. I don't know the math right off the top of my head. I could do it with more time, but I'd say that's a big tip I'd give to people. Bet early and monitor not only how the game goes and whether you win or lose, because that can kind of be fool's gold in a lot of cases, but look at where the market closes compared to where you made your bet.
There are more gamblers now in this world than we've ever had in the history of the world, and that's because it's become legal, I guess, in about 22 or 23 different states. And, of course, I talk about my hometown of Cincinnati. Hell, you can actually bet on Reds games at Great American Ballpark, but Pete Rose can't.
That's incredible.
But Pete Rose can't get in the Hall of Fame. I don't understand that.
Yeah, that's another subject.
I want to go old school, in case Keefer joins us here, sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun. He's too young to remember this, but Kip certainly isn't. Meeting the guy behind the dumpster, meeting him at your favorite restaurant on Saturday, Sunday mornings, or sometimes Monday mornings, depending on what happened on Sunday night. Sometimes you'd have carryovers. You'd call your guy, and back in the old days, and people that are listening to this show right now, youngsters, there weren't over-unders on every game. There wasn't. I mean, there weren't over-unders on NFL games on Sunday. Do you have an over-under on that? No, we're not carrying that. I mean, you could just bet one side. Now, of course, anything goes. It is available. You can bet on anything. And of course, in Las Vegas, it's always been like that. But Case, I want you to give your gambler, maybe he's just getting started right now. Maybe he's got a FanDuel account. He doesn't really think it's gambling. He's always just on the March Madness bracket thing, and he doesn't consider that gambling. But now, of course, he's making a $10 bet, and he's getting $100 back in his account. He's like, well, how is this possible? This is a great deal. They want to lure you in. The worst thing that can happen to a bad gambler is to win right off the bat, because you can think you start supplementing your income by doing gambling, and it's not for everybody. But I want you to give some people maybe 3 or 4 really interesting or important pitfalls that your average gambler can fall into right off the bat when they start getting involved in this type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the number one that I always start with is that I would say is don't pay for picks. I mean, the handicapper, or I don't even know the right word for it. I would call it scamdicapper, but the whole, cottage industry of people that, I know the fixed outcome of this game, or, I'm 63-8 lifetime. I have a 5-star non-guarantee lock winner. Never ever buy any of that. All you're ending up doing, these guys don't know anything. Number one, they're not selling their picks if they're successful as gamblers. There's a way to get down a lot of money. The best people in the world, I promise you, are not setting up 1-800 numbers or websites where you pay an exorbitant fee. So my number one thing is always don't pay for picks. Try to dive into things on your own, and you're just ultimately paying less juice that way. That's going to be the best thing to do. I guess that's number one pitfall. Number two pitfall, I know it's, you do, you mentioned that marketing and some of those advertisements, and I agree with you. A lot of it is predatory to me, especially, the whole single game parlay craze. And, you see these crazy tickets online, people winning 6 figures and 5 figures on small bets. And it does happen. And I'm not one to sit here and say, don't make those bets, but you kind of have to be realistic with it. If it's for entertainment only and you're just firing on it to have some skin in the game, that's fine. By all means, do it. But really, if you break down the math, you're just not getting the right payouts on things like parlays, and especially single game parlays. There are some things you can exploit, but I think that's more for the more advanced gambler. I would say, if at all possible, if you're trying to build up a bankroll and you want to do this seriously and not just for fun watching the game, I would try to stray away from parlays and more do some of the things I was talking about earlier. Line shop, try to find small edges with your recreational sports book as compared to some of the biggest sports books in the world. If you see Circa, who I mentioned earlier, or one of the big offshores, maybe like Bookmaker or BetCris, and you see they're like a half point off of a game at DraftKings or FanDuel, maybe just bet that half point to have some action. You're getting a half point of value compared to the places that are taking the biggest edges. So I would say stray away from parlays. Another pitfall, don't buy picks. And number 3, another super easy one, but Kip kind of talked about it with his dad. But one thing I've been really good about, maybe it's because I really don't feel like a traditional gambler. I'd say a huge one is just don't chase your losses. I mean, set what you want to bet. For me, it's been a unit size. This is going to be what I typically bet on a game. If I like it a little more, I can bet 2 units. Rarely do I go above that 3, but it's more to look at. It's better to look at this as like a business, and do a lot of accounting on the daily or in my case weekly side. Don't, because you lost a lot of money on Sunday in the NFL, bet 10 times more what you did on Monday Night Football. That's just increasing your variance. And as anyone who's gambled knows, that's just a recipe for disaster. So I'm sure I have a lot more, and you could read what I've written over the years, but those are 3 that spring immediately to the top of my head.
It does seem like a sucker bet right off the top. If I sit there and say, Case, there's 2 teams playing, I'm going to let you do all the research you want, and you get to pick which side you got. And I'm going to let you pick the side you want, and you're like, okay, great. And now, of course, you can bet halftime lines, and now you have live playing. I want to know a little more about live betting, because I've got a friend of mine who loves live betting, and he's doing pretty well at it. But how does that play off? Is that just another way to lose money or another way to win money? How do you look at live betting, and how many people actually do that?
Yeah, a lot of people do it, and a lot of people do it at a high level. It's not, and I'm not going to say I never do it. I certainly do bet live sometimes, especially like if Kip mentioned earlier, if I have a big position on a game and I feel like there's value on the other side, it is a way to treat it more like an investment and make sure you're getting some money back. I don't bet a ton live, though. I feel like it took me a long time to get to the level where I am pregame, and a lot of the things I do and a lot of the methods I use just don't apply as much to the live. The biggest pitfall, I guess, to keep going back to that word of live, that I would say to be really cognizant of is just so many of these cable providers, satellite, whatever, the game's just on a delay. So it's really kind of sketchy with live betting. A lot of times the sports books have a much better data feed, and they're a little bit ahead of you. And I know it's not as bad in Nevada, but in other states, they give you that little spinning wheel before they decide if they're going to accept your bet or not. A lot of times they're a little bit ahead of you, and they know what's going on in the game. They know if you're making a good or bad bet. So number one live tip I would give is probably only bet during commercials, because then you're at least on an even playing field. There's certainly money to be made live. A lot of that is super algorithmic. Sorry, I can't say that word. Model based. That's just going based on the pregame number. So if you notice something different, if there's something different going into the game, you can exploit that. But I'm more of a pregame bettor, and like I said, bet during commercials probably the best thing to do, because you don't want to be up against the sports books anymore. They're already taking out a percentage of every bet you make. Don't let them be ahead on the game too.
As a good tip, if it spins, stay away from it, whether it's roulette or whether it's a little wheel on your phone. Stay away from it. Kip, give him a last question here for Case, who joined us right here on the Keefer and Kurre Show.
Well, Case, why don't you give some people some idea of some of the futures you're holding right now in your portfolio, which particularly, Tony and I emanate here from the Birmingham, Alabama area, where football is king 365 days a year. I'm sure people would love to hear your early thoughts, particularly on college football and even pro football going into 2023 season.
This is another thing. I basically never stop. I've already bet quite a bit of football, so a lot of exciting ones coming up. I believe on the last Wanna Bet show, I locked in our first college football bet of the year. At that point, only national championship odds were up, but I did take Texas at 30-1 to win the national championship. I know people are probably laughing at that one. Oh, Texas is back again, but I think just analytically, this team was way better than their record last year. They have a ton back. They looked, it looks even better now. They looked great in spring ball. They have that great early showcase possibility where they play at Alabama. Even if they lose that game, they're still going to be in the running. I think they're going to be favored in every Big 12 game. I like Texas at 30-1. The only other team I've bet to win the national championship so far is LSU at 20-1. I really like how things set up for the Tigers this year. The schedule's not great. They also have to go to Alabama, but just talent-wise, I really like what they have coming back. And I thought 20-1 was just too long of a price. I mean, I think if you want to do this at a high level, you got to think kind of probabilistically. I mean, 20-1, I'm making that bet. It's going to be a profitable bet if I think they win the national championship more than 5% of the time. So if we run this upcoming season, say we're living in parallel universes, do we run this season thousands of times? Do I think they're winning at least 5%? I mean, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying LSU and Texas are the two best teams. If you're giving me one team to win the national championship, it would still be Georgia. But, I got them 5-1 at the beginning of last year. And I believe 10-1 2 years ago. I've cashed up futures on them back-to-back years. Now you're paying, plus 150, plus 200. That's just a lot harder sell. I will say there might be some opportunities to back Georgia in other ways. I hate to give out lines that are gone. You can't get this anymore. But one of my favorite bets I made is, like I said, I think Georgia's going to be the best team, and I think Carson Beck's going to be their starting quarterback. I bet him at 50-1 to win the Heisman. Wow. I think that's down to 30 or maybe 25 at the best now. That still might be one worth taking if you think Georgia's going to kind of be where they have been the last couple of years. I mean, you're getting their starting quarterback at a big number. So I have him 50-1 to win the Heisman. I've already made a ton of Heisman bets. Wasn't planning this way, but like I said, it's all price based for me, and most of them were long shots. I just kept finding guys that I thought were mispriced. I think the lowest guy I've taken back to Texas. I'm going down with the Longhorns ship if it falls again, but I bet Quinn Ewers at 25-1 to win the Heisman. I think that's the lowest price I have. I have a lot of long shots other than that. I could talk about college football all day. Sorry, I'm just ranting. One other kind of big topic thought. I haven't really placed any bets on this because it's hard to, but one thing I'll tell people to watch out for this year is I think the Pac-12, against its reputation, is going to be extremely tough this year. I know we like to poke fun at the Pac-12. It's kind of been the worst of the five major conferences the last half decade, or probably even a decade as a whole. But you look at the quarterbacks coming back in this league, the overall returning production. USC, Washington, Utah, UCLA has a 5-star freshman quarterback kid in. I think in the non-conference, where a lot of people have looked to bet against Pac-12 teams, I would not necessarily do that this year. I think the Pac-12 is going to be really tough. To me, behind the SEC, I think it might be the second best conference going into college football this year. Look out for Washington a lot. It's a team I really like to bet. I think Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. Penix is another guy. If you can get a long price to win the Heisman, really like Michael Penix this year. I didn't even mention Oregon and Bo Nix, another Heisman favorite. Not a guy I would bet, but the Pac-12 for a big idea thought. I think the Pac-12 is going to be a lot more competitive, and I would caution people against that just wanted to bet against the Pac-12 teams, because it's kind of been a profitable strategy in non-conference games the last few years.
A lot of Alabama fans not too crazy about your futures bet there on that Texas game coming up here September 9th. I'm just saying, maybe locally this is going to raise a little ire. It's great stuff. Hey, Case, thank you so much. Case Keefer, sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun. Thank you so much for your time. I could see us maybe doing a show like this once a week just to kind of get the ins and outs. Just saying, Kip, I'm just saying, right?
One quick thing, Tony. The other thing you and Case have really in common, you are probably the two most knowledgeable guys about music that I know. So at some point, I would love to just be a spectator and let you guys talk about music, which is Kate's other passion.
I've got it written down on my page, and like I said, I think I could have gone an hour and a half today, but that will allow us to do some future shows. Yeah, because I'm a huge classic rock guy. In case I know you like the newer stuff, but we'll talk about it next time we get you on. How's that?
Great, for sure. I appreciate you guys having me. Have a good one.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.